Hello, I'm Michael Pierce, and this is The Human Condition. I'm wearing red glasses today because we're filming and it's not noon, and I have bright blue lights shining on me, so this is to protect my brain and my eyes so that I can serve you better and longer. We're talking today about top anxiety causes, root causes, and ways to really get at fixing it. Persistent anxiety is a real problem in this world, and people take too many benzodiazepines and too many dangerous drugs to deal with that. And so I'd like to really get at the root cause of how we can reverse anxiety and get at the foundations of what's going on. There are several. The most important one I want to talk about is for modern people is inflammation and oxidative stress. There's some pretty clear evidence that we make all kinds of brain waves when we're under stress. In some cases we make slow waves, but there's really good evidence that we make fast waves called beta spindles. And so these excessive beta spindles show up as little squigglies, and they're really easy to see, and they're really easy to tell the difference between a brain-based beta wave and a muscle-based beta wave. And I'll tell you how to do that in another video, but the idea is that technically you can see the difference between one that comes from inside the brain and one that comes from outside the head from a muscle on your scalp, like one of your TMJ muscles or your forehead muscle. So those EMG or electromyography squiggles are different than brain squiggles that are called beta waves. And those beta waves, especially if they're in the front of your head instead of the back, tend to be related to anxiety. They are often initiated by stress. They're initiated by cortisol. They can be initiated by inflammation and by oxidative stress. So it's important to be able to measure that at times and take a look at what your oxidative stress could be. I've talked many times about the urine test for 8-hydroxydeoxyguanosine, which is a very good measure of DNA stress, oxidative stress that damages DNA. So if it's positive, it means that there's been enough stress to damage DNA, guanosine. But if it's not positive, it doesn't mean that you don't have oxidative stress. It just means that you don't have enough oxidative stress to damage your DNA yet. So you could find out by just taking an antioxidant like N-acetylcysteine or glutathione or superoxide dismutase or vitamin C or vitamin E and seeing if your symptoms get better. Likewise, you could also reduce the sources of inflammation like seed oils and like carbohydrates and processed foods. Those are ways of reducing inflammation and reactive oxygen species and oxidative stress. Also, reducing blue light and wearing glasses like mine is a great way of blocking blue light. In fact, these glasses are so amazing that when I look at the blue light of my microphone, I can't even see that the light's on through my glasses. I have to take off the glasses to see the light. It blocks blue light 100%. So very exciting to protect my eyes with a $19 set of glasses. So I hope you all can get a pair. There is another set of difficulties which is related to anxiety, and that is the B12, vitamin B12 problem. Vitamin B12, turns out that Amy Yasko discovered and wrote in her books, especially Genetic Bypass, that some people don't do very well with methyl B12. Even if they're under methylators and they don't methylate very well, they want to goose their methylation and reinforce their methylation. So what they do is they go to the most cheap source that's abundantly available in all the supplement companies, and you get a methyl B12 supplement because it's in every B complex. And they take it and they get anxiety. And it's not necessarily because too high of a dose of B12, it's usually because they either have the wrong form, which is methyl B12, or they have a deficit of lithium. Now, you can take natural lithium as lithium orotate, and that helps a person use B12. Lithium is a cofactor for B12. We're not talking about prescription lithium here. We're talking about over-the-counter, 5 milligram or less, gentle, simple lithium orotate that's available in the health food stores. Not dangerous, not difficult, not the same as prescription lithium for bipolar disorder and other things. Also, you might ask, well, what do you take if you don't take methyl B12? Well, if you don't take methyl B12 because of anxiety, you might consider things like hydroxy B12 and adenylyl B12. Yasko describes that the COMT genes and the VDR genes, if they are in the right combinations or the wrong combinations, will end up making a person intolerant to methyl B12. And so they have to switch over to the other kind of B12. And that can be a lot of people. It's a whole bunch of people. So consider that. I have moved away from giving in individual preformed plant-based B vitamin supplements, and I mostly now give just organ meat pills ground up. So that would be an organ meat pill like a occasional grass-fed organic mixed beef organ meats like hearts and livers and kidneys, etc. And I don't give it every day. I don't think it's necessary every day. But when people take it in a irregular pattern, they can very often do very well with absorbing all the minerals and B vitamins and things that are in livers and kidneys and hearts and all that stuff. But it's nice to have a mixed set of organs and not just rely on one organ like liver or heart or kidney alone. Now, you might say that, well, gosh, it's dangerous to take organ meats. Well, not really. Some people do have problems with organ meats, but it's usually when they're on a high carbohydrate diet and they're very, very inflamed, and they might get problems with iron or other types of B vitamins. And those people are usually on some kind of plant-based supplement as well. You won't see that very often if you're just eating a carnivore or keto or low-carb diet generally. You can also test for those things in the urine. You can test for B vitamins to find out if you've got too much or too little. We also want to look for intolerance of folates. Many people are into folates because they like to test for the MTHFR SNP, and that's a methyl tetrahydrofolate reductase type of SNP, and that's a gene indicator, a marker, that a mutation that says that you might need a special kind of folate, a special kind of folic acid. And that really comes from an animal-based diet very, very easily, and you don't need to take a supplement. Some people like to take a 5-methylfolate supplement that's plant-based, and it will give some people a great deal of anxiety. It's not everybody. In fact, it's probably less than 25% of people. But if you want to study this more, please study walshinstitute.org. William Walsh does a great job of explaining in his work about when to use folates and when not to use folates. We can't dive into that here, it's too much, but that's a very useful thing for those of you that are considering anxiety that's folate-based. So even, yes, I'm saying even 5-methylfolate at 800 micrograms might be too much or not okay for some people. I've had to take some people off of all folate pills and only use organ meats, and that works very well for certain genetic combinations. But usually those people have a whole bunch of SNPs that makes them predisposed to this problem. It's not everybody. It's not even a high percentage, but it's important. Now let's talk about heavy metals in the basal ganglia. We've talked about heavy metals in the basal ganglia before when we were talking about movement disorders, because I reminded you that the basal ganglia is a deep set of structures inside the brain that's very primitive. It's evolutionarily old and phylogenetically old, and it has a tendency to have cells that are not as robust as more modern types of cells. And so these very primitive cells have some problems handling heavy metals. So what happens in anxiety is some of these people get very, very sensitive to heavy metals, and they can get rumination, obsessive compulsive disorder, movement disorders, anxiety, repetitive self-talk, derogatory self-talk. They can get kind of an earworm where you get a piece of music or a song or a phrase in your head and you can't get it out. Maybe it's a chant from a commercial or a song from a commercial on TV. You might also notice that you count edges or corners of windows or doors, or you count the eyes and ears of people's faces. You just count everything around an edge. So if you have that kind of obsessive compulsive feeling and you never told anybody about it, it might be related to your chemistry. It might be related to just being ramped up from having heavy metals, having too many carbohydrates, and as we said earlier, too much of the wrong kind of B12, not enough lithium, etc. So you could feel easily triggered by many events in life, and if you're easily triggered, you might have this type of problem of B vitamin imbalance. Please also realize that one of the ways you can lose B vitamins is through anti-nutrients. If a person eats a lot of anti-nutrients, which are the plant defense molecules like lectins and phytates and isothiocyanates and solanins, these are all kinds of molecules that are in plants that plants use with different mechanisms to make animals go away and stop eating them so that the plant can survive. Those irritating molecules tend to bind to B vitamins and to minerals and other things and carry them out of the body, even to proteins. And so they go out of your body in your stool, so you poop them right out. So that's one of the reasons that a person might eat a diet that's very high in B vitamins on the label. They look up on the label these foods, or ideally even foods that don't have labels, like a piece of broccoli, or they look up kale, or they look up grain like oats or barley or wheat or something, and they look up to see how much of a B vitamin is in there. And then they discover that they're not really absorbing it because it's going out of their stool, because it's binding to all those lectins and anti-nutrients that they're eating from the vegetables and plants that they're eating. Now remember, most of those anti-nutrients are the most concentrated in grains, beans, nuts, and seeds for lectins. And for other things, unfortunately, the cruciferous family, which is the ones people really think is healthy for you because of the sulforaphane, they don't realize that you can't eat those those foods. Those foods are cruciferous vegetables. Those are broccoli, cauliflower, Brussels sprouts, broccolini. Those foods are in the brassica family, or the cruciferous family. And while they seem to be quite healthy for some people, they really mess other people up, give them gas, give them indigestion, and may not even give them any signs that they have indigestion, just steal their nutrients from them. They can also lead to some autoimmune diseases, but that's another lecture. We'll find that sometimes a person has poor response to professional work on either adult trauma or childhood issues or PTSD and anxiety. They might go to a really good therapist that knows very many methods. They might use all kinds of named methods. You guys may know those better than I do. I'm only a chiropractic neurologist. I'm not a therapist or a counselor. And so a mental health professional that works with counseling might use techniques like cognitive behavioral therapy or EMDR, eye movement desensitization and repatterning. And they might find that it's frustrating that it doesn't work so well. And so when that happens, I usually, when those therapists consult with me on a hard case and they ask for a second opinion, very seldom do I tell them that they did the therapy wrong or that they picked the wrong therapy. I find sometimes, most of the time, that it's some kind of biochemistry problem. And when we can find and remove that biochemistry problem of something that they're eating that's bad for them, or something that they're not eating that they need, because that's really all there is in healthcare, that when we fix that, the counseling methods all of a sudden work again. So it's really cool to see a therapist that gets frustrated, find out about these things that I'm talking about with biochemistry, change the diet, and then the person's better in a few weeks, and then they can go on do their therapy, and the therapy then works, and they can do that deep work, they can dive in, and they can spend the time they need with their therapist to really get the anxiety worked on, and not necessarily have to take the dangerous benzodiazepines and other anti-anxiety drugs that people take. So benzodiazepines are a real problem because they can change your genetic expression of your basal ganglia in one dose. There are some really interesting papers on this if you want to read about them, but go to PubMed and look at the Medline system, which is the U.S. government scientific repository of peer-reviewed literature, which is mostly corrupt anyway, but it's one of the greatest places to go for a lot of neat and good work as well as a lot of corrupt work. But you can find that there's some really good papers on benzodiazepines and their dangers. So it's not necessarily a great thing to just take benzos for anxiety and for sleep. So please be careful if you're considering that or if you're already on that. There are some really natural herbs that are very useful for controlling anxiety, and they work on the GABA pathway, which is the benzodiazepine pathway. Things like passion flower and things like Bacopa monnieri. Bacopa monnieri is an herb that has been known to work really well with a bunch of receptors, not just GABA, but dopamine and serotonin too. I must say that brain waves are important. You know, I wouldn't be on here if we weren't talking about QEEG and ERP testing, which is passive and active brainwave testing, using a cap to measure your brain waves that come out of your head naturally. Why not measure it? Because there's no radiation and you're just measuring brain waves. It's very holistic, very natural, and a great way to see inside your head and see through your skull to see what your brain waves are doing. And it's highly accurate, especially if you know how to read it. Not everybody knows how to read them. So that's important. And then once you've got that information, you can use neurofeedback. Now, you don't have to have an EEG or a QEEG or an ERP test to do neurofeedback. Most people around the world just do neurofeedback based on their symptoms. And their symptoms help localize where in the brain they should be placing the electrodes and where they should feedback for more of a different frequency or a different amplitude or power of some brainwave coming out. And you can train those brainwaves to be more or less powerful and in different places in your brain and be suppressed and all that stuff in very natural ways with simple feedback. I need to also talk about cortisol response. The cortisol response to stress is a big deal. So if you've got a stressful job or a stressful relationship or some kind of stressful life circumstance, your adrenal cortisol may be elevated, and then over time it may be squashed and be depleted. So it may be useful to do a urine test to find out about that. Adrenal cortisol responses can really lead to big-time anxiety in the morning or in the afternoon or at night. The big times that usually happens are around 7 or 8 when you wake up, or earlier. If you wake up much earlier, between 2 and 5 a.m. We also see a real hangry spot around 3 p.m. in the afternoon when a person starts to have a hypoglycemic-driven cortisol response. And, you know, trace mineral deficits will cause this too. So look for hypoglycemia, look for low blood sugar, look for experiences where you just start sweating and feeling hangry and confused, and it's because you haven't eaten for too long and you don't have enough trace minerals. Also look for hidden concussion. A number of people swear they've never had a concussion because they never lost their speech or they never passed out or they never lost consciousness. But anything that's big enough to cause a whiplash, if a stress is big enough to cause your neck to get sore, it's big enough to give you a concussion. Likewise, if you get a concussion, anything that's strong enough to give you a concussion is strong enough to give you whiplash. So I always tell people, when you're going to the chiropractor, check your brain. And when you're going to the brain doctor, check your neck with a chiropractor, because you've probably got both injuries. And it's very important to look at both. So a concussion evaluation by a good chiropractor would be a great idea. And last, the chemical or the toxic concussion. That can come from genetic-based reactions to everything from vaccine adjuvants and injuries. It can come from the Novocaine that you use when you go to the dentist. It can come from anesthesia when you get surgery, when you get anesthesia. It can come from chemical concussion, can come from even just toxic exposures to, say, paint thinner or solvents or even mold. You can get a concussion, basically a chemical concussion, from just exposure to some chemistry that messes with your brain. We call that organic brain dysfunction, and it's in all the textbooks. But the causes of organic brain dysfunction are many things. Toxins are one set of them, and there's a whole lot of toxins that can do that. So I hope this gives you a lot of categories of things that you can do to help with anxiety and not be dependent on medications your whole life. And maybe if you are on medications right now, get them reduced, because one of the great goals of people that are dependent on medications, and rightfully so, is to get their dose down, especially if you're on polypharmacy. If you're someone that has a lot of drugs, polypharmacy means too many drugs. And we really don't know much more about two drugs. We know about one drug somewhat, and we know about two drugs interacting with each other somewhat, but not really. But when you start taking 3 drugs or more, it's really rough. And a lot of people out there are taking 7, 8, 9, 10, 12 drugs, prescription drugs, and that's very dangerous. We really don't know what polypharmacy does to people, so it's always good to try to contain and eliminate drugs and get rid of them and reduce them as much as possible if you can do it with your doctor. Thanks, guys.